Hi, my name is Ann Collingham. Uh, this is a presentation for CSP 840 Adult Development. Today I am going to be talking with you about Lawrence Kohlberg and his theory on moral development. You will find that I have referenced on each slide where I received the information or collected it from, with the exception of slide 3 where I show videos, and all of that information is referenced in the notes pages of that slide. Lawrence Kohlberg was born October 25th, 1927 in Bronxville, New York. He was the youngest of 4 children. His father was a silk merchant and his mother was an amateur chemist. Upon graduating high school in 1945, he served in the Merchant Marines for approximately 1 year. After that, he worked on various ships, and one time he was working for a ship that was hired by an organization to smuggle Jewish war refugees into Palestine. When that vessel was attempting to accomplish this task, they were intercepted by the British, and therefore he then was imprisoned in a British camp for approximately a year, a little bit under a year, I believe. After he was released by the British, he came back to the United States, and then he began to focus on his education. In 1948 to 1949, he was at the University of Chicago, where he completed his bachelor's in psychology, and then he began working on his PhD, and he finished that in 1958 at the University of Chicago. And his PhD was also in psychology. In 1955, he married Lucille Stigberg, and they eventually had 2 sons, David and Stephen. After his graduation and receiving his PhD from the University of Chicago, he conducted and taught in various academic settings, as well as conducted research. And in 1968, he finally ended up at Harvard, where he became a professor for the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and he remained there until 1987. He died in January 17th of 1987, and he died by suicide, specifically drowning. He evidently drove to the Boston Harbor and walked in the water and killed himself. A lot of this, I guess, was due to ongoing complications to a disease, a parasitic disease he had contracted when doing a mission work in like the 1970s, and it was just unbearable, and I guess he was miserable and depressed ever since then. Key accomplishments that he had throughout his lifetime included the development of the 6 stages of the moral development, as well as founding the Center of Moral Education at Harvard Graduate School of Education. So Dr. Kohlberg was living and active and doing a lot of his work during some pivotal moments in our history here in the United States and the world, for that matter. So I focus purely on the timeline when he was doing his professional work, so the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s. So during that time, in each of these videos, you can watch at your own leisure. They're about 2 to 3 minutes long. It's hard to capture, an entire decade worth of pivotal moments in our history, but there are just a few things that to highlight to show how much change was going on. So like in the 1950s, we were post-World War II, lots of different booms in the economy going on. You had people migrating to the suburbs from rural areas. The beginning moments of the civil rights movement, the Cold War was ongoing, and the Korean War was beginning at the end of that decade. Then you move it into the 60s, and you think in the 1950s, in 58 he was finishing his doctorate degree and really getting into the research, development, and education portion at the end of those 50s. In the 1960s, you had the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Kennedy assassination, civil rights movement. They called it the Great Society, basically, where they were trying to take care of the people. So, you have Medicare, Social Security starting to come into play. That was the parts of the Great Society. And then, you had the Vietnam War initiating in the 60s. And then finally, I just put it as peace, love, and freedom because there was movement to garner peace, to love and free, live in a free way. And you think of like Woodstock, things of that nature. So lots of movement and freedom of expression, and freedom to be yourself for who you are. That was happening in the 1960s. In the 1970s, you had the Vietnam War still going on, more anti-war movements going on as that war drag on. Uh, Various new rights that were being sought for people, for their race, for their gender, for sexual equality, lots of different things, both for protesting movements type activities, standing up for those freedoms, as well as legislation that was going on. There was another big movement for environmental concerns going on. The Watergate scandal, that was going. And then 1970s was a big boom in technology. You started seeing more for TV, more for phones, computers were starting to come out. And again, the peace, love, freedom, it was kind of a continuation from the 60s into the 70s, plus a lot of self-determination and self-love, self-work going on. And then finally in the 80s, this decade was basically encapsulated by Reagan, conservatism. It was the fall of communism. You had, the fall of the Berlin Wall. You had the separation of the Soviet Union. Many numerous things where democracy was starting to spread, communism was coming down. You had the AIDS epidemic going on, Iran-Contra affair, which was a huge global issue. And then the other thing I put in there was news cycles. TV was becoming more prevalent. And so around those later times when Dr. Kohlberg was alive and he was working, you were starting to get, we weren't quite to that 24-hour news cycle, but it was becoming more prevalent. And again, technology, phones, computers, 87, depends on how technologically advanced he was at in the Harvard area, but the internet was there. It existed. So all those things were going on. So while researching and working on his doctorate, Dr. Kohlberg was inspired by Jean Piaget's theories of development, his cognitive theories of development. And during this time, he started thinking that it was more than just cognition and thinking. Also during his time period, behavioralists were quite prevalent. So he interviewed 72 Caucasian boys in Chicago, utilizing the Heinz dilemma. And what the Heinz dilemma was a situational story where a gentleman was having to try to get medication for his wife who was dying from cancer. However, the pharmacist, it was very expensive medication, and so he couldn't afford it. And so it was asking basically if he should be punished for stealing the medication so that his wife could live. And so based on how the boys answered this dilemma, he bent them into where he saw them in the stage of development. And he believed that children developed their own moral judgment. And as you can see, he developed basically 6 stages of development. However, there were 3 categories that he bent those 6 stages in. He believed that a person moves through these stages in fixed order, and that the moral understanding that is demonstrated in each one of these stages is linked to their cognitive development. And then as you get older, the complexity of the moral dilemmas that you're working through, it increases with each stage. So the first category is pre-conventional category, and in this stage you have punishment and obedience and self-interest. These happen when people are a child. Basically, in the pre-conventional category, its morality is based on direct consequences to the person. So during the punishment and obedience stage, a child's looking at how can I avoid punishment? What's going to happen to me and what can I do to not get punished? And in self-interest, that's where the child is trying to answer those, what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this in those stages? Then they move on to the conventional category of stages. In these stages, they're looking at morality as based on societal views and expectations. So they're really taking into account what their peers, what their family, friends, what they're all thinking of the individual when they're making those decisions. So the first stage in the conventional category is conformity and interpersonal accord. So basically, they're looking for that good boy attitude. Excuse me. They're looking at right, wrong, those types of decisions based on, I want to be perceived as a good person. Then the next stage is authority and maintaining social order. Basically, this is your law and order type stage of if you do something wrong, you deserve to be punished, things of that nature. Now, in this, when they're going through this stages, people are usually adolescents to younger adult or adults age. Now, the last category, post-conventional, this is based on morality means ethical principles based on their own ethical thoughts, their own ethical principles. So not necessarily what society believes, but what they believe. These are purely for adults, this category, and Kohlberg did not think that many achieve this level of moral development. So the first stage in this category is social contract, which means consensus of the thoughtful man, and then universal principles, basically trying to decide, what if everybody did this? Do I think I should make this decision? What would happen? Excuse me. So the influence that Kohlberg's moral development had on society, on psychology, education, everything, there were some harsh criticisms. Golly. Basically that, and the criticisms all form around that his test bed for his research was conducted on male Caucasian males. And it was very limited to that. It wasn't limited, so it didn't, it missed the voice of marginalized people. And yet, even though it had those harsh criticisms, that it was only applicable to a very select few, it still inspired and influenced many other more research across the realms of psychology based on this thought and this idea of morals having impact on development. So at the time when he was coming up with this and he was exploring it, it was against all other developmental theories in that time. Most of them were focused on cognition and behaviorism. And so it did not acknowledge the effects of values in that research. And finally, the other influence that moral development theory had is it allowed people, those that are working with people at all ages, to better understand what thought processes and reasoning may be going into decisions that those people they're working with, what's behind that, what's kind of contributing to them making the decisions that they're making, or their understanding of the decisions that they're making. So why moral development theory still matters today? Basically, it's because it can still be applied today with the understanding that his research was limited to Caucasian males in that research. However, the research that's built upon his initial research still contributes to how moral decision making can contribute to the way a person sees and experiences the world around them. It also can understand people, like not understand people, it can also help those who are working in like helping professions such as ourselves as counselors, teachers, even like other health professionals. It can help them because they can use the theory to better understand student behavior and student decisions, student thought processes based on what kind of age group and what kind of things they're seeing being exhibited from those people in that time period. With the criticisms, though, like as you apply this theory or you think of this theory, you have to be understanding that there are other things that are likely contributing to a person's decision-making process when it comes to moral matters. And so Kohlberg's theory may not be quite directly applicable or relevant to whoever you are helping in that situation. And I know there's other presentations on Gilman and her building off of Kohlberg's theory of moral development so that it meets like it's applicable towards females. And so that's an example of how he's influenced. This has influenced further research, further refinement, further expansion of this idea that morality is a key part of somebody's development process.